And now, Legal Perspective with Nick Klekus.
The right to protest is protected under the First Amendment, but that comes with rules, risks, and responsibilities. From permit risks to police encounters, Klekus law firm attorney Allie Menegakis is here to explain what every protester should know before taking the streets. Allie, thank you for being here. Great to have you back with us. What rights do people have when they protest?
Man, we have so many rights in this country, it's amazing. So under the First Amendment, you have the right to free speech, you have the right to free assembly, a right to petition the government, and you really generally have a right to go out and protest in the streets so long as you're not doing certain things. You want to check your local ordinances to see what rules apply to wherever you're planning on protesting. But generally, so long as you are obeying the laws, you're not blocking any kind of traffic, you don't have amplified sound, and you don't have such a large event that might require a protest.
Okay, so...
A permit, sorry.
Permit.
Yeah.
When would you need a permit? When is that applicable?
Generally you really don't need a permit. It really comes down to how big of a protest you're going to have. So, for example, some certain cities and municipalities have certain rules about it, which we'll go into in a little bit, and regarding Charleston. But generally, so long as you are being peaceful, you're not causing any kind of disruption, you're not, as we talked about last week, not inciting any violence or making any kind of defamatory statements, you should be good.
Okay, so recent years, you just talked about Charleston, locally here, there has been quite a few people that got arrested for protesting. When is that allowed? Why is that allowed?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I want people to know is that you should be excited to go out and exercise your right to free speech.
Yeah.
I don't want people to come away from this interview or from things going on in the news thinking that they're not allowed to protest. The last thing we want to do is stifle speech. But, in recent years, locally, even in the city of Charleston, there have been a lot more arrests for people engaging in free speech than usual. And, at least in the city of Charleston a few years ago, they passed a local ordinance specifically about permitting. And what that ordinance says is when you have to get a permit. And there's essentially, you can go out in the city of Charleston so long as you're on, a public property, a sidewalk, a park during, the hours that it's open. If you have less than 25 people there. Now, if you have more than 25 people that are going to be in your group protesting, then you do need to apply for a permit. But there's an exception to that. If there's a spontaneous event, and that makes sense, right? So if there's some big breaking news and we want to go out into the streets and protest or celebrate, we shouldn't have to wait for a permit to do so. So there's an exception for that. But it is important to note that just because you apply for a permit doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get one, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you might get one where or when you want it. For example, last month there was a group that wanted to have a protest the same weekend as the bridge run, and they were denied that permit, and then they ended up suing the city of Charleston for violating their rights. The law enforcement was saying that they didn't have enough resources to protect just the protesters and other observers.
What ended up happening with them? I mean, do they have much of a leg to stand on?
Well, they filed for an injunction to let them actually have that protest, and that was denied. And my understanding is that they are taking that and appealing it to a higher level.
Okay. How does one go about applying for a permit?
So you should always check, it depends where you are. Usually it's with the local law enforcement agency. A lot of times the agency or the city that you're going to protest in has that information on their website. If not, call, and they have an application process and a certain amount of days that you have to apply before.
Okay. And just touching back on what you just said, so they applied for a permit during the time of the bridge run, and pretty much law enforcement said they didn't have enough resources. So typically, if you were protesting and there was, an encounter with law enforcement from a legal perspective, how do you best handle that?
Yeah, well, the first thing is anytime you're going out to a protest, it's always a good idea to be prepared. So how would we be prepared? First thing is always go in a group. or have a buddy there, or if you're going by yourself, that's fine. Just make sure you tell someone, an emergency contact, where you're going, where you're going to be, and write down the number of your emergency contact, or better yet, your attorney, on a piece of paper. Some people put it on their arm as opposed to in their phone. The reason is, if heaven forbid you do get arrested, you're not going to have access to your phone at that point.
Well, for any legal questions or any legal needs, 843-900000000, Cleekis.com is where you can go. Allie, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. I always leave knowing so much more than when I came. Thank you so much.
It. Thanks.
We're back in 2 minutes.
This has been Legal Perspective with Nick Cleekis.